This is wrestling's greatest moments.
Hey now, wrestling fans! It's time for another episode of Wrestling's Greatest Moments. Wrestling fans have seen some incredible big men, but few could command fans' attention like Sid Vicious. Sit back as Wrestling's Greatest Moments presents Wrestling's Magnificent Monster, the Sid Vicious Story. Before we get started, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell so you don't miss a single video. From farmer to fighter, Sid Udy worked as a farmer in Arkansas while he mulled his future over, initially seeking to become a crop duster. Nonetheless, he'd always been an athlete and was tempted by a chance to play professional football. During an interview with former WWF interviewer Shaun Mooney, Sid revealed he'd tried out for the USFL team, the Memphis Showboats, but was caught at the last moment. A chance encounter in the gym changed his future. Sid ran across wrestlers Randy Savage, Lanny Poffo, and Harley Davidson, aka future WWF superstar Hillbilly Jim, who were competing in Memphis's Continental Wrestling Association, CWA. They convinced him he could make more money as a wrestler, which would come in handy as Sid's wife was expecting. According to Sid, he was strictly in the business for the money, and hadn't watched wrestling since he was in 4th grade. Sid debuted in wrestling under a hockey mask, playing Lord Humongous, just one of several men who would play the wrestler based on a character from Mel Gibson's film, The Road Warrior. Sid's look was enough to get promoters' attention, and he found work in the CWA, the Continental Wrestling Federation, the World Class Wrestling Association, and even New Japan Pro Wrestling. There, he worked as the Vicious Warrior. Sid hit the national stage in the United States when he was invited to wrestle in Ted Turner's World Championship Wrestling, WCW. Just one look. Sid's run in WCW saw him team up with Dan Spivey to form the heel team, the Skyscrapers. Just one look at the powerfully built Vicious was all it took for fans to know the big man meant business. Vicious and Spivey formed a good team, and as often happens in wrestling, fans began cheering for them because they were so dominant in the ring. Unfortunately, a broken rib and punctured lung led to Sid's exit from the team, and he was replaced by Mean Mark Callis, aka the future Undertaker. After his recovery, Sid landed a primo spot as a member of the Four Horsemen, joining Ric Flair, Arn Anderson, and Barry Windham in the latest incarnation of the faction that fans love to hate. Vicious provided the group with plenty of muscle, and his spot in the high-profile group suggested just how much WCW saw in him. Vicious had the proverbial rocket strapped to his back, and WCW reportedly wanted to lock him down to a big money contract with promises of a main event push. During an appearance on Shaun Mooney's podcast, Vicious recalled how WCW was ready to offer him $500,000 a year to sign. Vicious claims he was already making $250K a year. Sid claims that WCW encouraged him to reach out to the WWF, which he did. Sid recalls his meeting with WWF kingpin Vince McMahon. Vince sits down and says, "Well, Sid, we don't give guaranteed money, but here's the magic wand. You tell me what you want," and I said, "I want Hogan's spot." Sid remembered Vince responding with, "It's yours." Vicious wanted to know the particulars of any WWF deal. I wondered what kind of money are we talking about, and he talked about merchandising and what WrestleMania would bring and things like that. He said what WrestleMania would bring is the same thing that I would make in a year at WCW. He suggested that, but he didn't say for sure. WCW reportedly countered with a guaranteed $750,000 contract, and Sid was ready to sign it, only for Vince to call him and tell him he would never get an opportunity like this in the WWF again. Sid gave in and followed his heart, turning down the WCW deal and heading for the WWF, where he debuted as babyface Sid Justice. As fans know, Sid made a big splash at SummerSlam when he served as special referee for the match made in hell. The conflict saw Hulk Hogan team up with the Ultimate Warrior to take on Sergeant Slaughter, General Adnan, and Colonel Mustafa. Justice called things fair and square and later posed in the ring with Hulk Hogan after the Hulkster and Warriors win. The WWF's push for Sid continued as he saved Miss Elizabeth and Randy Macho Man Savage from an attack by Jake the Snake Roberts and The Undertaker during their wedding reception. The WWF pushed Sid strongly, but as fans know, he eventually turned heel following Hulk Hogan's rather unsportsmanlike behavior at the 1992 Royal Rumble match. There, Hogan yanked Justice out of the ring during the Rumble match, even though Hogan had already been eliminated. This allowed Ric Flair to win the match and the WWF Championship as the title was on the line in the 30-man Battle Royal. This led to Sid's WrestleMania 8 co-main event against Hulk Hogan, which ended in a disqualification win for the Hulkster. Vicious disappeared from the WWF, leading to questions about what happened. According to author James Dixon, Sid was unhappy with his status in the WWF following his first run there. Despite Vince McMahon reportedly having big plans for him, McMahon's first experience with Sid would make him question whether to bring him back a few years later. Vince had reservations about working with Judy again following a fractious business relationship in 1992 that ended with Sid walking out of the WWF rather than facing suspension for a drug test failure. In some ways, Vince was relieved about that. He had grown frustrated with Judy having offered him the chance to step into Hulk Hogan's role as the company's #1 babyface, only for Sid to decline and cite his preference for being a heel. Vicious claims he got upset when he learned the WWF's idea of Hogan passing the torch to him was his pose down with Hulk Hogan in 1991 SummerSlam. Sid claims the move angered him and made him want to leave the WWF. He also claims the money he made in the WWF was less than he made in WCW. Unhappy with the WWF, Vicious left the promotion and returned to WCW. There, he teamed with Big Man Vader, who also used the Powerbomb as his finisher. The team was dubbed the Masters of the Powerbomb, feuding with Davey Boy Smith and Sting. Once again, WCW saw Vicious as a top star and was setting things up for a face turn and a feud with Vader. Nonetheless, that was not to be after a violent encounter between Sid and wrestler Arn Anderson. Sid struggles outside the ring. The only thing that held back Sid's career was Sid. While he didn't battle the personal demons that plague so many of his fellow wrestlers, his temper led to several run-ins with his colleagues, one that led to a serious injury. Sid and Arn Anderson got into an argument at a bar during a European tour. Sid returned to his hotel room, but reportedly brought a broken chair leg to Anderson's hotel room, banging on the door and calling Anderson out. As noted in the book, Sex, Lies, and Headlocks, hearing just silence on the other end, Vicious started away. Just then the door flew open and Anderson lunged at him with a pair of scissors, nicking his hands but penetrating his stomach. Vicious managed to absorb the blow and the scissors fell in the ensuing scuffle. Sid picked them up and started stabbing Anderson in the back. A pint of blood spilled from more than a dozen incisions in Anderson's chest and a 5-inch gash across his throat. Anderson muttered, "You're killing me," and passed out. WCW fired Sid, who was scheduled to meet Vader at Starrcade and defeat him for the WCW World Championship. Opportunities always awaited Sid. He returned to wrestling, working in the United States Wrestling Association in 1994, capturing the USWA Unified World Heavyweight Championship twice. He later returned to the WWF in 1995. Even critics such as Ric Flair, who blasted Sid and his memoir to be the man, understood why Sid was always asked to come back. Sid offered nothing to the business. He didn't want to learn how to perform or build up to execute an exciting match. On more than one occasion, he claimed to be injured or sick, but managed to play in his softball league. Still, promoters kept throwing money at him because of his monster look. The reality is that Vicious debuted at the perfect time in wrestling, when promoters were constantly looking for the next Hulk Hogan. Unlike big men such as El Gigante, aka Giant Gonzalez, or the Great Khali, Sid understood the grappling game's fundamentals, making him more than just a tall wrestler with a powerhouse physique. While no one would ever accuse Sid of putting on 5-star clinics, that wasn't his role. Sid was meant to be a human wrecking ball who overpowered opponents and shrugged off their offense like water off a duck. The ideal Goliath. Pro wrestling thrives on tropes such as David and Goliath battles, so it's little surprise that Sid Vicious was pitted against some of the sport's top babyfaces, who were significantly smaller than him, including names such as Brian Pillman, Shawn Michaels, and Bret the Hitman Hart. While Sid was custom made for David and Goliath battles, he was big and bad enough to give promoters big men a run for their money. Some of Sid's big men opponents included El Gigante in WCW and The Undertaker, Diesel, and Hulk Hogan in the WWF. In his memoir, Hollywood Hulk Hogan, the Hulkster praised Sid's work, describing him as A real pro in the ring, and a guy who would do whatever you asked of him. Whatever misgivings Vince McMahon had about bringing Sid back, and bear in mind that this was a wrestler who had walked out on him and who allegedly stabbed Arn Anderson, Sid's assets outweighed any liabilities. According to the book Titan Sinking, the Clique felt Sid was a good fit for the company, and Vince apparently felt that pairing Sid with Shawn Michaels as the Heartbreak Kid's bodyguard would add heat to Michaels' heel act. Thus, Sid returned to the WWF in 1995. Sid's bodyguard role was short-lived, as Michaels blamed Sid for costing him a WWF Championship match against Diesel at WrestleMania. This led to Sid laying Michaels out and joining Million Dollar Man Ted DiBiase's Million Dollar Corporation. Ironically, DiBiase, who was now managing rather than wrestling, didn't want to manage Vicious. DiBiase was friends with Arn Anderson and didn't like the idea of working with someone who had injured his friend. DiBiase gave in and eventually changed his opinion of Vicious. I came to find out that Sid was a decent guy. He wasn't a good technical wrestler, but he had a chiseled body, conducted great interviews, and had respect for the business. He was a legitimate 6'9" and was very intimidating. He listened to me and worked very hard to improve in the ring. He eventually became a 2-time World Wrestling Federation heavyweight champion. Unfortunately, a neck injury sidelined Vicious, and he left the WWF again. Sid worked in sales in California, selling chemicals to farmers. Sid claims he was making as much as he'd made in wrestling and was comfortable with his new job. Nonetheless, a call from Vince McMahon asking Sid to fill in for some dates for the Ultimate Warrior, who had reportedly walked out on the WWF again, led to him returning to the company full-time. This campaign led to 2 WWF Championship runs, including a wild program against Shawn Michaels, and a later WWF title win against Bret Hart. Sid's latest WWF run saw fans cheering him. Sid could likely have been a top babyface, but Vince McMahon was unsure, and backstage politics posed another problem. Sid's general unreliability made him unlikely to assume the mantle of long-term babyface hero, along with his unfavorable standing with the influential Michaels. This became a moot point after Sid re-injured his neck. This time the injury necessitated surgery, and he left the WWF. Sid's wild WCW ride. After his recovery, Sid worked a few matches on the indie circuit and toyed with a run in ECW. ECW being ECW, Vicious quickly realized there was no money to be made, and he left, returning to WCW. There, he enjoyed a push as the Millennium Man, defeating Chris Benoit for the United States Championship. Vicious later defeated Kevin Nash for the WCW World Championship. Sid would hold WCW's top title twice. Sid's WCW run ended abruptly at 2001 Sin pay-per-view. There, Sid suffered a compound fracture to his left leg after attempting an aerial move from the second rope. Although Sid didn't want to do the move, he was encouraged to do so to expand his arsenal. Sid underwent surgery to repair the compound fracture, and a doctor told him he would never be able to run again. Sid's desire to run fueled his passion to prove the doctors wrong. He eventually recovered and worked occasional matches until retiring in 2017. Sid also appeared in the WWE, including the Raw 1000 episode of the WWE's Monday Night program. What do you think of Sid's many campaigns in the Squared Circle? Where do you rank him among wrestling's monster heels? Share your thoughts in the comment section, and let us know if there's any videos you'd like Wrestling's Greatest Moments to cover. In the meantime, subscribe to our channel, follow us on X and Instagram, and spread the good news about Wrestling's Greatest Moments, the channel that celebrates the Squared Circle.